Today, the government of Libya announced the death of Muammar Gaddafi. This marks the end of a long and painful chapter for the people of Libya.
In 2011, a plan was set in motion that would have freed an entire continent from Western financial control. A leader with 144 tons of gold was just months away from launching a currency that would have changed the world's economic balance forever. Then, 26,500 NATO airstrikes rained down on his country. What if I told you that the humanitarian intervention in Libya was actually about something far more dangerous to Western powers than a dictator? There is an old African proverb that says, when elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. For decades, Africa has been the grass trampled under the feet of Western financial institutions. Hey everyone, this is the strategic lens where we look beyond the headlines to uncover the real forces shaping our world. Today, we are investigating one of the most misunderstood events of the 21st century, the real reason behind NATO's intervention in Libya and the elimination of Muammar Gaddafi. Now, this isn't just about a leader. No, it's not even about a country. It's about a vision that threatened to rewrite the rules of the global economy. A vision centered around a single gold-backed African currency called the gold dinar.
My mission is to encourage my brothers and wake up the African peoples to unify our continent, Africa.
In just a moment, I will reveal a leaked document that exposes what Western powers were really afraid of. And it had nothing to do with protecting civilians. But first, let's really understand what was really at stake. The world we live in runs on the US dollar. It's not a coincidence, and it is not because the dollar is inherently superior. It's by design. Look at these numbers. Nearly 90% of international currency transactions happen in dollars. 60% of foreign exchange reserves are held in dollars. And almost 40% of the world's debt are issued in dollars. This gives the United States extraordinary powers over nearly anyone who imports or exports anything, anywhere. But it wasn't always like this. In 1944 at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, 44 countries agreed the US dollar would become the global reserve currency, pegged to gold. Other currencies would be pegged to the dollar. When the US could no longer back the dollar with gold in the 1970s, it made a clever move. It convinced Saudi Arabia and OPEC to price oil exclusively in dollars, creating what we now call the Petrodollar system. Have you ever wondered why countries with no connection with America still need dollars? The answer is about to challenge everything you thought you knew about global finance. Any country purchasing oil must first exchange its currency into US dollars. When your natural resources are priced in US dollars and not your local currency, who really controls your wealth? This system gives America two incredible advantages. One, it creates artificial demand for the US dollars. Two, it allows the US to buy oil and other resources with money it can print at will. Did you hear what I said? With money it can print at will. Remember that when the US is buying resources from your country, for example, it gives you dollars. Those dollars are printed with a printing machine. Meanwhile, those resources have been formed under your soil for billions of years, which process is more valuable and which process is easy to recreate. Think about that power for a moment. But in 2009, an African leader proposed a system that would destroy this arrangement forever. And he had the goal to back it up. In 2009, Muammar Gaddafi was named chairman of the African Union, a body he helped found. With Libya's vast oil wealth, he had transformed his country from one of Africa's poorest to its most prosperous. By 2011, Libya had the highest human development index in Africa, free health care and education, newly married couples receiving $50,000 to buy a home. Interest-free loans through state-owned banks were rampant. The Great Man-Made River Project, a $33 billion irrigation system called the eighth wonder of the world. But Gaddafi's ambition extended beyond Libya. He had a revolutionary vision to unify Africa economically and politically. A single African currency backed by Libya's 143 tons of gold and similar amount of silver. What would happen if African countries no longer needed dollars to trade with each other or sell their resources to the world? Gaddafi plans to use this gold-backed currency for all oil sales from African nations. Countries would no longer need to go through the dollar to buy African resources. This wasn't just talk. Gaddafi had accumulated $7 billion in gold and silver reserves, funded 66% of the $42 billion needed to establish an African Central Bank, African Investment Bank, and African Monetary Fund, began organizing other African countries to join his monetary revolution. But someone was watching closely, and they understood how dangerous Gaddafi's plan really was. While most attention focuses on America's dollar, there is another currency that controls the fate of millions of Africans: the CFA Franc. Created by France in 1945, the CFA is used by 14 former French colonies in Africa. And here is where things get really disturbing. African nations must deposit 50 to 65% of their foreign reserves in the French treasury. They must accept that France can veto their financial decision, submit to France's power to devalue their currency at will. What kind of independence is that? What kind of sovereignty is that when somebody controls your money? If somebody controls your money, it means you don't have independence. It means you don't have any sovereignty. These are the deals that France signed with presidents or the head of states that France installed when these countries were gaining their independence. In 1994, France suddenly devalued the CFA franc by 50%. Imagine waking up the next day and discovering that your money has disappeared by 50% from your savings account. That's what happened to millions of Africans, and many African countries have not yet recovered from that period up to today. But the CFA system isn't just about currency. It's part of a web of controls that include military defense agreements allowing France to intervene at will, preferential access to resources for French companies, political manipulations, and regime change when leaders resist. Remember that proverb about elephants fighting? France's neocolonial system has kept the grass ordinary Africans trampled for decades. Ask yourself, what would happen if African nations abandoned the CFA and used instead Gaddafi's gold dinar? The threat to France was existential. If African countries controlled their own currency backed by gold, they will no longer need 1. France's approval for economic decisions, 2. to store their reserves in Paris, and 3. to price resources in currencies they don't control. Then, in 2011, a bombshell email was sent to the US Secretary General Hillary Clinton that revealed France's true concerns about Libya, and it had nothing to do with humanitarian intervention. On April 2, 2011, as NATO bombs fell on Libya, an intelligence brief was sent to Hillary Clinton with the subject line, France's plans and Gaddafi's gold. This wasn't meant for public eyes. It was only revealed years later through WikiLeaks and FOLA requests. Let me read you the most revealing section. Gaddafi has nearly 143 tons of gold and in similar amount of silver. The gold was accumulated prior to current rebellion and was intended to be used to establish a Pan-African currency based on Libyan golden dinar. This plan was designed to provide the Francophone African countries with an alternative to the French franc. The email then lists France's motivations for military intervention: obtain a greater share of Libya's oil production. 2. Increase French influence in North Africa. 3. Improve Sarkozy's domestic political standing. 4. Provide the French military with a showcase. And 5. Most importantly, to prevent Gaddafi from establishing a Pan-African currency based on the Libyan golden dinar. Did you catch that? Most importantly, more important than humanitarian concerns, more important than democracy, more important than even oil, was stopping Gaddafi's plan for a single currency for Africa.
The people of Libya must be protected.
Why doesn't it appear anywhere in this confidential memo about France's motivations? The document continues explaining that the gold-backed dinar would have challenged France's interest in the region. But it wasn't just France that was threatened.
The people of Libya must be protected.
So, I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
In a moment, I will show you why the US saw Gaddafi's plan as a threat to its global financial dominance. And what happens to the last leader who tried to sell oil in a currency other than the dollar? In 2000, Saddam Hussein announced that Iraqi oil would be traded in euros, not US dollars. 3 years later, Iraq was invaded, Saddam was ousted, and within months, Iraq's oil sales were switched back to dollars. Was Gaddafi aware of this? Absolutely. At an Arab League summit shortly after the Iraq invasion, Gaddafi warned, "They hanged Saddam. We might be next." Gaddafi warned already, but he believed his position was stronger. He had African Union support, 143 tons of gold ready to back a new currency. A continent rich in resources was behind him. What would happen to the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency if Africa's vast resources, oil, gold, cobalt, diamond, rare earth minerals, were suddenly priced in a gold-backed African currency? The answer is economic catastrophe for the West. So you see, this wasn't just about Libya. It was about preventing an entire continent from achieving financial independence. But how did Western powers do this with the world watching?
The people of Libya must be protected.
How did they convince the world that this operation in Libya was about protecting civilians?
With Gaddafi, and you look at what happened. I mean, look at Libya, look at Iraq. Iraq used to be no terrorists. He would kill the terrorists immediately. It was like, now it's the Harvard of terrorism. Iraq.
The answer reveals one of the greatest deceptions of our time. On March 17, 2011, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 1973, authorizing force to protect civilians in Libya. What followed was one of the most intense bombing campaigns in recent history. 26,500 NATO sorties over 8 months, 7,000 plus bombing missions. The UK spent £320 million on bombing, 13 times more than on post-war aid. When NATO forces bombed Libya, they targeted the Great Man-Made River project first, Libya's irrigation system that provided fresh water to millions, then destroyed the factory making repair pipes. Does that sound like protecting civilians? If humanitarian concerns were the priority, why were there several other crises in the region receiving little attention from the West? Compare Libya before intervention to after. From highest human development index in Africa to a failed state. From a unified country to warring factions and open slave markets. From economic independence to chaos. The French financial newspaper Les Echos later reported that before the rep formed a government, they had created a new central bank and established oil deals with French firms. We watched this film before. France doing the same thing. When everyone was happy in the 1960s that France allowed its colonies to get half independence, no one really knew that France had signed deals, terrible deals, with these strong men that they installed to be presidents. We only knew about that many years later, that France had these deals of currency, they had these deals of interfering in the politics of the country, they had these deals of bringing military and all that. During the issue of Libya, France had already negotiated oil deals. France secured up to 35% of Libyan oil. France has no oil of its own where it is in Europe, but France sells oil more than oil-rich countries. They convince the rebels that what are we going to gain? Give us 35%. Let's agree, give us 35% so that we can back you up. Meanwhile, they were the one gaining on both sides. They gained preventing the CFA, they gained preventing Africa from obtaining its currency. They made all these deals with the rebels before the rebels even took power. In a moment, I will reveal to you what happened to Libya's 143 tons of gold and silver after Gaddafi's fall, and the lesson every African nation learned from watching Libya's destruction. In a moment, I will reveal to you what happened to Libya's 143 tons of gold and silver after Gaddafi's fall, and the lesson every African nation learned from watching Libya's destruction, the aftermath. After Gaddafi's brutal elimination, Libya's gold reserves mysteriously disappeared. The country with Africa's highest standard of living descended into chaos, becoming a failed state with competing governments and open slave markets. The African Monetary Fund, Central Bank, and gold Dinar that Gaddafi had planned all abandoned. France secured 35% of Libyan oil for French companies, particularly Total Energies. The CFA Franc system continues to extract wealth from African countries. But something unexpected happened. The destruction of Libya and its vision for African financial independence created a lasting distrust for Western intentions on the continent. Many African countries are turning to Russia, China, in regional blocs, working on local currency swap arrangements, pushing France out of its military bases. We have all seen what is happening in West Africa with Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Burkina Faso was under French grip since independence and even before independence. And since independence, Burkina Faso have had just 3,000 kilometers of paved roads. But since Ibrahim Traore took over power, Burkina Faso is creating 5,000 kilometers of paved roads every year. France, how can you keep another country in these conditions for so long? It's terrible. It's horrible. The elephant fight destroyed Libya, but the grass is growing back elsewhere. What would Africa look like today if Gaddafi's plan had succeeded? Would we see a continent of sovereign, wealthy nations instead of continued exploitation? Perhaps the greatest tragedy is not what happened to Libya, but what would have happened for Africa. Through economic independence that would have transformed the lives of over 1 billion people. As our African proverb reminds us, when elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. But the story isn't over. Africa's oil, gold, minerals, and human potential remain, and so does the dream of true economic sovereignty. If this video changed your perspective on world events, share it with others so that they can understand how global financial powers work. And ask yourself, if some Western powers are willing to destroy an entire country to prevent a gold-backed African currency, what does that tell you about the true value of Africa's resources and potential? This is the strategic lens that look beyond the headlines to reveal forces that shape our world. If you haven't liked or subscribed to this channel, I don't know what you're waiting for. We are about to hit 500,000 subscribers, and I would like you to help us reach that goal. If you want more content that challenges mainstream narrative, join our growing community of critical thinkers. Until next time, remember, follow the money and you will find the truth.